My name is Sheila Corona. Welcome to Sassy Seer Sheila and New Light Streaming Love, as this will be seen on both channels. This is The Fortress I Never Meant to Build by Jason Gray. The transmission date on this piece was 5/23/2026. There are walls around me now, not symbolic walls, real ones, steel, stone. Layer after layer of reinforced silence built carefully around the parts of me that once stood exposed to the world without protection. Sometimes I wonder if people truly understand what it takes for a human to build a human being to build walls this thick around themselves. Nobody begins life this way. Nobody enters this world emotionally armored, hypervigilant, guarded, and difficult to reach. Children do not naturally live behind fortresses. Children begin open, soft, trusting, emotionally exposed, hopeful, willing to believe love is safe, willing to believe honesty will be handled gently, willing to hand people pieces of themselves without calculating the cost first. There was a point in my life where there were no walls around me at all, no gates, no distance, no internal checkpoints screening every interaction before allowing emotional access. I simply existed openly. But pain is an architect unlike any other. It studies structural weakness. Wow, yes, it does. It learns where the soul fractures easiest, and once pain becomes repetitive enough, construction begins automatically. Brick by brick, not dramatically, quietly. A betrayal here, a disappointment there, a wound you never fully recover from, a humiliation you buried instead of healed, an abandonment you pretended did not affect you. Moments where vulnerability was punished instead of protected. Moments where trust became regret. Moments where opening your heart resulted in watching pieces of yourself collapse internally afterward. People often think major trauma alone creates guarded people. Sometimes it does, but many walls are also built from smaller wounds, repeated over and over for years until the nervous system quietly decides, quote, never again. Once the nervous system learns that closeness can become pain, it never fully forgets. That is the part many people do not understand. Guarded people are rarely choosing distance consciously every moment. Much of it becomes automatic. Survival adaptation. The mind begins protecting the heart before the heart even realizes danger is approaching. The walls rise higher. At first, they are temporary, a coping mechanism, an emotional brace, a short-term defense after pain. Eventually, the defenses stop being temporary. They become structural, permanent. You stop opening naturally. You stop trusting instinctively. You begin scanning people instead of simply experiencing them. You learn how to conceal emotional exposure before anyone can weaponize it against you. And after enough years pass, the walls no longer feel like something you built. They feel like who you are. People often mistake guarded people for cold people. But most guarded people are not cold at all. In fact, many of them feel everything far too deeply. That is why they became guarded in the first place. People who do not feel deeply rarely need walls this strong. But when you absorb pain deeply enough, eventually self-preservation becomes instinct. So you adapt. You become harder to reach, harder to read, harder to hurt, harder to fully know. Not because you want to disconnect from humanity, but because repeated emotional devastation changes the way the nervous system interprets closeness itself. That is the loneliest part. Despite everything, some of us desperately want connection. Desperately. And boy, do I feel you there, my love. We want someone to understand us without harming us. We want someone to understand us without harming us. We want someone to hear the fortress, enter the fortress gently enough that the alarms finally stop sounding. We want someone who feels safe enough that we no longer have to calculate emotional survival every time we grow attached. Sometimes I truly try. I open small doors, offer glimpses, fragments, a memory, a truth, a wound, a softer side of myself most people never get close enough to witness. And in many ways, my writing has always been part of that process. Because long before I knew how to fully let people close to me emotionally, I knew how to write. Writing became the safest bridge I could build between myself and the world, the safest doorway, the safest form of exposure. Writing allowed me to reveal myself while still remaining partially protected behind the walls I had spent decades constructing. Every piece I write contains pieces of me buried inside it. Oh, I recognize that right off. Not just thoughts, but emotional fingerprints, pain, regret, observation, fear, longing, confusion, isolation, hope. The desperate human desire to be understood without being destroyed in the process. People often believe they are reading philosophy, reflection, or observation. Many times they are actually reading glimpses of the person hidden behind the walls. My writing has always been my way of saying, quote, "This is who I am," without fully standing emotionally exposed in front of another human being. For people like me, expression becomes compromise, a middle ground between total isolation and unbearable vulnerability. Writing allows me to leave doors cracked open without tearing the fortress down entirely. And maybe that is why I write so much. Some people speak their inner world aloud. I write mine into existence instead. The hardest thing to explain is how my defenses actually function once someone begins getting close to me. Because most people think guarded people immediately push everyone away. Sometimes we do the opposite. Sometimes we invite closeness. Sometimes we crave it more than anyone realizes it, but the closer someone gets emotionally, the more the internal defense systems begin activating automatically. The closer someone tries to get to me, the further away I often become. Not physically, emotionally, internally, instinctively. Closeness itself begins triggering survival conditioning that was built long ago. The deeper the attachment becomes, the more exposed the heart becomes. The more exposed the heart becomes, the more danger the nervous system perceives. The more danger it perceives, the stronger the defenses activate. So people often experience contradiction with someone like me. At first, I may seem deeply open, emotionally intelligent, present, honest, intense, expressive. Once genuine emotional closeness begins forming, another part of me starts retreating automatically, pulling inward, creating distance, becoming quieter, harder to read, harder to fully reach, sometimes even while I desperately do not want to. And that contradiction is exhausting. Withdrawal is not always intentional cruelty. Many times it is unconscious survival, an emotional reflex developed through years of accumulated pain. The nervous system eventually begins associating attachment with risk because historically the deepest wounds arrived through the deepest connections. So, when intimacy approaches, the mind no longer simply asks, "What if this heals me?" Instead, it whispers, "What if this destroys me again?" That is what people rarely see behind guarded individuals, the internal war. One side desperately craving connection, the other side desperately trying to survive it. One part of you wants someone to finally understand you completely. The other part fears what happens if they do. And I'm going to pause right here and say, not just to Jason, but to everyone who might feel what he's saying here intensely as yourself. Because I can definitely relate to this. And actually, it was some of Jason's writings that helped me come to this conclusion. Because we are a perspective that is completely unique, made up of every experience we have ever had, experiences that no one else has had in the exact order in which we've had ours, because our experiences color everything we've ever experienced and our current perspective. No one will ever completely understand us. Oh, we can get a close approximation to it. Folks who don't think we're crazy, folks who can see, sense, and feel our perspective. but not maybe totally understand it. That was something I finally understood for myself, that I have come to feel that, and I'm okay with that because I now, again, living in community with others who are doing this kind of internal work, because what he's talking about here, actually, he's experiencing, to me, from my perspective, he experiences triggering something in what he's experiencing triggers, even unconsciously, that survival mode. Those are deep programmed grooves, right? So deep that they are unconsciously triggering survival mechanisms. And there are ways to finally see them. This is part way there by recognizing that they exist and then asking self questions about them, because generally triggering is an alert system to let the conscious part know, hey, there's something here for us to look at. And I get it, especially if you're not in a community of, and I'm going to say like-minded, because folks who are doing this kind of internal work are like-minded. Lisa actually called me a safe place to land, meaning she could pull out this kind of work and I'm not going to, I don't know, it doesn't trigger survival mechanisms because I've been there, she's been there, we've all been there. So when you're working on these kinds of things and you get triggered, if you're not able to do it alone, and trust me, I'm not able to do it alone. Having folks in community to do that kind of assistance to look at these triggers, get to the bottom of them for that healing. At least, look, the way I see this is this writing right here is you seeing your triggering mechanisms. To me, that's what I see. So I'm going to read this again. One side desperately craving connection, the other side desperately trying to survive it. One part of you wants someone to finally understand you completely. I've let go of that because I now get it as a unique perspective of consciousness. You're not meant to have somebody understand you 100% because it's not possible on any sort of level. But a close approximation of it, yes. The other part fears what happens if they do. So you live suspended between opposing needs, wanting closeness while fearing closeness, wanting love while preparing for loss, wanting permanence while expecting abandonment. Over time, the nervous system becomes trapped in contradiction. Yep, been there. You reveal yourself carefully while simultaneously preparing escape routes emotionally. Maybe that's why I've kept myself from being in any sort of emotional romantic entanglement in these since my last marriage ended 9 years ago. You allow people near the gate while remaining ready to shut it. The moment vulnerability feels unsafe, and eventually, even you become exhausted by your own defenses. There are days where the fortress protects you from pain, and there are also days where it protects you from life itself, from intimacy, from warmth, from being held emotionally, from rest, from genuine peace. I feel what you're saying here, and that is why listen, I have been more intimate with my YouTube channel than I've ever been with any of my romantic partners. I've been more intimate with my partners here in this household, my community, housemates as well. And I have been held emotionally by my housemates. So I totally get what you're saying here. From rest, from genuine peace, from the terrifying beauty of fully being seen. There is there is something to say for standing totally naked, as I do here. I now advocate it fully. That is the hidden cost of emotional armor. It keeps danger out, and sometimes it keeps love out too. Some days, the loneliness inside those walls becomes deafening. People imagine loneliness as having nobody around you, but some of the deepest loneliness on earth exists inside guarded people, surrounded by others who never truly reach them. I know that feeling. I know it well. There's nothing worse than feeling alone in a crowded room. People who function normally, who smile, who work, create, laugh occasionally, continue moving through life, all while carrying entire emotional civilizations internally that nobody fully touches. I do not believe my story is unique. You're right, it's not. Absolutely. And I didn't think you would ever believe that. I think millions of people quietly live this exact same reality. People who once loved openly before life taught them caution. People who once trusted naturally before pain taught them calculation. People who became strong not because they wanted to, but because survival demanded it. That is why I try not to judge guarded people anymore, because you never know what somebody endured before they became difficult to reach. You never know how many nights someone rebuilt themselves alone. You never know how many times someone had to gather broken pieces of themselves in silence while pretending they were fine publicly. Boy, like I said, you don't get to 490 pounds and not know what this feels like. Trust me. Sometimes the strongest walls were built around the softest hearts. And maybe healing for people like us is not about destroying the fortress overnight. No, it's not. Maybe healing begins much smaller than that. Maybe it begins when someone finally encounters a human being who does not try to invade the walls, manipulate the walls, climb the walls, or force them down. Someone patient enough to simply remain present long enough for trust to slowly emerge on its own, brick by brick, the same way the walls were built. The strangest part of all of this is that after everything, After the walls, the loneliness, the distance, the pain, the survival mechanisms, the years of construction brick by brick, I have made peace with who I am. This is me, not the performance, not the image, not the version people project onto me, not the guarded silence people mistake for indifference. This, the man behind the walls, the man who learned how to survive long before he learned how to heal, the man who built fortresses out of pain and turned writing into windows, the man who spent a lifetime trying to understand both the world and himself while quietly carrying more internally than most people will ever know. I no longer hate myself for it. I understand now why the walls were built. They kept me alive, maybe imperfectly, maybe at a cost, but they carried me here. I'm so thankful for that, Jason. So very thankful for that. Now, standing where I stand in life, I realize something that becomes impossible to ignore once you reach a certain age. I have likely already lived most of my life, 3/4 of it perhaps. The realization no longer frightens me the way it once might have. If anything, it has brought clarity. When you begin understanding that your remaining chapters are fewer than the pages already written, something inside you changes. That's true. Illusion begins to fall away. Pretending loses its value. You stop chasing things that no longer matter. You stop trying to become everything to everyone. You begin looking at your life differently. Not through the eyes of ambition alone, but through meaning. When I look back now, despite all the pain, mistakes, losses, regrets, and fractures, I also see something else. I accomplished many of the things I believed I was meant to accomplish. Not perfectly, but truthfully. I wrote relentlessly. I left pieces of myself behind in words. I translated inner worlds into language. I reached people I will never meet. I made people think, reflect, feel, remember, question, confront themselves, confront life, confront pain, confront illusion. In the end, I think that is all any writer can really hope to do. Long after my voice is gone, long after my footsteps disappear, long after the world forgets the details of who I was personally, the writing will remain. The writing will continue traveling into the minds and lives of people I will never know. A thought here, a sentence there, a reflection that reaches someone at exactly the right moment in their life. A paragraph that makes another human being feel less alone in their fortress. Yes, Jason, that's true. There is something profoundly peaceful about that realization. Human beings are temporary. What we leave inside other people is not. Maybe that is what I was truly building all along. Not walls, but echoes. Echoes that will continue speaking long after I no longer can. And strangely enough, that brings me peace. Jason Gray. Wow. Man, that Jason Gray, let me just tell y'all something. Not that long ago, he wrote to me and he called me a female Yoda, which made me laugh so hard I can't even stand it. I just want to go on record and saying I am so grateful to have come across his writing. I can't. I got to go have a good cry now.